Academy Studio at ASRM 2023 in New Orleans. We welcome you at the second day, and opening today's program for us is Dr. Charles Borman. He's going to tell us a bit more about the use of time-lapse in his unit. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you so much, and I really would like to thank Vitrolife for the kind invitation for me to speak today about some of the efficiencies our laboratory has really uncovered by using time-lapse imaging. My laboratory has had a time-lapse imaging system in our practice since about 2013. In the last year, we've upgraded it to the EmbryoScope Plus. So if we're just talking about the United States and access to healthcare, you can see here on this map, these colored regions are all areas where we actually have IVF practices available. But unfortunately, you see a lot of teal here. And when you see this teal, that means there's not an IVF center in that location. And it's really estimated that we need to increase the number of IVF cycles that we perform in the United States by about 10-fold to meet the demands of our infertility patients. And when we think about IVF laboratory and what we're doing now compared to what we did even 5 or 10 years ago, it's extremely complex. So this is just a schematic of the complexity of a typical PGTA cycle that's being performed in a laboratory. And this is starting from the egg retrieval to removing the cumulus cells, to doing the fertilization, doing the biopsy, freezing, thawing, and doing the transfer. As you can see, these procedures are being done on multiple platforms across multiple days by several different embryologists. So the complexity of what we're doing is very high. And so whatever we can do to find efficiencies in the laboratory so we can accommodate more growth is a must. So one of the things that we need to really consider when we are trying to grow our practices and accommodate this growth is our space requirements. And I'm really focusing kind of how our practice has utilized EmbryoScope and how it's really changed things for us. And so in our practice, we typically were using the IVF Cube, these Aztec incubators. And each of these incubators have 4 different drawers that we would culture patients in individually. And we did that for safety precautions. So when we think about the EmbryoScope Plus, this one can accommodate 15 patients at a time. So really, we can do all of those cases in this one incubator. And it's been huge in terms of just our space saving in our laboratory. But another thing that we find a ton of efficiencies on is our quality control testing. So if you're really running an outstanding laboratory, you are tightly controlling every aspect of the culture environment. And so for each incubator that you're using, that we would have a temp alert system. That's our alarm system that we utilize, so we are monitoring it 24/7. We are also doing daily CO2 and O2 measurements on each of these incubators, daily temperature, and then we even do these weekly pH measurements. So you can imagine right here when we use the IVF Cube, that's 16 of these measurements every single morning compared to doing it once with the EmbryoScope. So again, these are huge time efficiency savings, and trust me, my embryologists are much happier doing one of these units. But in addition to that, we're saving a lot on our gas supplies, and so all of those resources that go into operating our incubators. So this is actually our numbers from our IVF laboratory. So we do around 1,000 fresh retrievals each year, and about a quarter of those are egg freezing patients. So for now, our egg freezing patients aren't going into the EmbryoScope. It doesn't really make that much sense. That leaves about 750 cycles a year. And we do a really good job of kind of gating how many starts that we have each week so that we are doing a pretty balanced number of IVF cases every single week. So I recommend that to anyone out there. Make sure you're doing the proper number of starts each month to meet your needs in the laboratory. So what this tells us, we do about 750 cycles for IVF or conventional insemination each year. So with our IVF EmbryoScope Plus, it holds 15 patients. In each cartridge, it holds up to 16 embryos. So that equals, like, at one given time, we can have a total of 240 embryos within one of our incubator system. That's equivalent to about 780 patients a year if we're doing it for culturing them for 7 days straight. In our laboratory, we're actually culturing up to day 6, so we can do a little bit over 900 IVF cases a year in one incubator if everything's running smoothly. So one of the fears I had when I was condensing all of these patients into one incubator was I thought it was going to create this bottleneck system. So we would have one incubator and we would be lining up to do our FERT checks, or we'd be lining up to do any of our evaluations. And that has not been the case at all. In fact, our bottleneck is when we were doing not conventional insemination, but when we were doing our fertilization assessments actually on an inverted microscope. We were waiting in line to do those, but we don't wait anymore. Because you can imagine, you can have remote access. You can be in your office, you can be remote from home, and you can be doing the embryo grading or the fertilization assessments. So just to remind everybody what a fertilization assessment is, we typically do that between around 16 hours post-insemination, where we're looking at all the eggs that have been inseminated to see if they were fertilized normally or abnormally. And this is a really important measure that we are using to communicate to our patients and to our physicians. In our practice, it's very important because this dictates a lot of the care that our patients receive. For instance, if a patient has 4 or more TUPNs, they're automatically a day 5 transfer. If they have less than 4 TUPNs, they're automatically a day 3 transfer. So if you're using time-lapse imaging, another beauty is that you're not limited to assessing them at one time point, because we know eggs can fertilize at different times. So it allows you to look and really confirm if it fertilized or not by scrolling back or waiting a little bit more. So you're not really fixed on a given time based on the point in which you did your insemination. Another thing I really love about our time-lapse imaging system is that you can utilize some of the image data for artificial intelligence capabilities. And what I'm showing here is actually some of the stuff that we've developed in our own laboratory, where we've developed modules or algorithms to help and assist us with performing fertilization assessments. So when we think about artificial intelligence, we think about our input. Our input is our image at 16 hours, and our output is whether it fertilized normally or abnormally. And when we've been doing this type of testing, we have over 96% accuracy in correctly classifying with it whether an egg fertilized normally or not. So the way we really envision using this, or this is how we can use it in our own lab, we can take images from the embryoscope at these given time points, and we can grade it ourselves. So we're really using AI as an aid for the embryologist, and we're confirming with the AI whether it thinks that if we both agree that it fertilized normally, if we both, the AI and the embryologist, agreed that it fertilized abnormally, or if they don't match. Maybe the embryoscope said it's normal, and maybe the embryologist said that it was abnormal. That would tell us to take it out of the incubator, maybe roll it around, and confirm that it was normal or not. Also, the embryoscope does have the capability of doing guided annotations and helping you grade your embryos faster. Similarly, we've developed algorithms as well to help aid in our embryo grading and classification of them. So again, when we talked about our inputs are these images on day 5, as you can see here, and our output was the quality of these embryos. So we can use AI algorithms, or we can take images that we are gathering from an embryoscope and using that for classification purposes. And again, this is how we can use it as an aid for an embryologist. We can look at the images that we're capturing from the embryoscope, and we can grade them ourselves, and we can confirm with our algorithms to say whether we should culture them, whether we agree that we should freeze them, maybe we should culture them an additional day, or whether they're not viable. Similar, we can make these same decisions based on whether we should biopsy them or not by using this image data. Another really important way that we can use the embryoscope is with cohort embryo selection. So I'm always trying to make sure that everyone in our laboratory is selecting embryos in the best way or performing transfers at the highest level. So I'm always seeing, if I see differences in our embryologists, I want to find out why there are differences in the success rates of an embryologist based on who did their transfer. So I do these different quality assurance measures. And one, when I was seeing some differences in my embryologists, I would look at their timing. I would time all my embryologists thinking maybe somebody that was too fast or too slow, maybe that kind of accounts for the differences in their pregnancy outcomes. But I didn't see any differences at all. Then I start looking to see how they are rinsing their catheter or how they're loading their catheter. Is somebody loading with too much media or not enough media, to see, is this really helping account for why there are differences in these pregnancy outcomes? But there was nothing that was really related. And then I was watching my embryologists to see, what are they doing differently between each other? And when we were culturing embryos individually, we had an algorithm just based on how we were grading the embryo. We would plug those numbers into our spreadsheet, and then we would look at our spreadsheet and we make our decision on which embryo to transfer. But I had one embryologist that was completely ignoring my SOPs and saying, no, I think there's a better way for me to select this embryo. So what he would do is he would take a picture of every really nice quality embryo in our batch, and then lay them out on a table, and then he would make his selection and say, okay, now that's the one I want. So effectively what he was doing was trying to look at all the embryos simultaneously and then make his decision. That way he could compare and contrast that embryo against everyone in the cohort. And he had by far the highest pregnancy rates. So with EmbryoScope, that's what you have the ability to do. You have all the embryos on the screen simultaneously, so it's not just what the grades are. You can really compare and contrast them against each other to really aid in that selection process. Again, there are AI algorithms that are being developed from Vitrolife and others to help improve and make it more consistent which embryos you're selecting for embryo transfer. Also, I really love the EmbryoScope in a lot of ways for training, when we're training our new staff members. So instead of them always looking over your shoulder through the microscope and inverted scope at these grades, you can actually really teach them and look at the EmbryoScope and have them compare and contrast like fertilization assessments, embryo grading, and it does really well. And what we know is there's a lot of need right now for improved grading capabilities. There's a study that I did just with my laboratory where we developed these apps to look at, we had these different modules to look at blast expansion, the inner cell mass, and trophectoderm grades, and have them grade these modules. And as you can see here, they were all over the place. I mean, I really think I have the best embryologists in the country, but we were not consistent at all when we were grading embryos. And we know it's so important, especially since these are the decisions that we are making right here based on the embryo grades. We are making decisions whether we transfer that embryo. We make decisions whether we're going to biopsy or freeze. We decide whether we're going to culture it an additional day or not. But ultimately, we know we're making decisions on whether we're keeping them in culture or not. And so it is critical that we are making the right decisions here. And again, with EmbryoScope, we do have more of that ability, especially when we utilize tools such as AI. So these are a list of some of the efficiencies changes that we've made in our laboratory since we've had an EmbryoScope. We are now more flexible in when we are performing our inseminations. Before, we were always waiting 4 to 6 hours after our retrievals to do our insemination, because that really aligned with the time the next morning we came into the laboratory and we were going to be able to do our fertilization assessments. We don't have to have that same structure anymore, because we can come in and do our fertilization check at any time. We stopped grading embryos at the cleavage stage. We didn't find much value in taking them out of the incubator and grading them at the cleavage stage anymore. And for those cases where we wanted to really reflect back on and say, well, how did the embryos look on day 2 or day 3? We didn't have to rely on our spreadsheets or on our data sheets. We could go back to the image itself and really scroll back and get some real-time image information. We stopped performing day 3 assisted hatching on all of our embryos as well. This is one of those things where now we wait until they're at the blastocyst stage, and we're only taking them out of the incubator if they've reached our quality score of 3BB or better that we say qualifies for biopsy or freeze. So if they're not there yet, we're leaving them in the EmbryoScope and leaving them untouched and uninterrupted. And that's been a huge time saving for us as well. So overall, we've really limited the number of embryos that are removed from the incubator, and we've done quite well. And I think because we are making different decisions and we're really looking at the grades, and when we do the biopsy and the freezing, we are able to make our final decisions on embryo disposition by day 6 of development, because we can look at it on day 6 in the afternoon and do our final freeze checks on them. And so that frees up our EmbryoScope for one extra day. With that, I would like to open it up to any questions. Hi, Francesca.
Would you estimate embryology hours per cycle? Do you think you're saving with all these QC and PN checks? Is it like 1 or 2 hours per cycle, or?
Per cycle, easily 1 hour. It could be upwards of 2 hours, but easily an hour per cycle. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well with that, Dr. Charles Borman, thank you very much for that talk, and thank you for joining in, and we'll see you at the next talk.
All right, thank you.
Life. This marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side.
Hello everybody, welcome back at the Vitrolife Group Academy Studio here at ASRM. The next speaker on our agenda today is Dr. Christer Silversand, and he's going to tell us a bit more about temperature measurements and a new way of measuring temperatures. Thank you, Silver.
No, okay. Thank you, Jaco. Thank you, Vitrolife. I'm going to talk about temperature control of media in dishes during handling outside the incubator. Some people may think it's easy and straightforward to ensure a constant and accurate temperature while handling gametes and embryos outside the incubator. I do not agree. I think it's quite a challenge to actually both control and to measure temperature. One reason for this is related to the type of temperature measurement probe that is commonly used in IVF. Some of these probes are simply not suitable at all for this measurement, and it has to do with specific characteristics of this probe. Few people are aware of this, and that's the reason why I want to talk about it today. I will also, however, introduce you to a new way to measure temperature while working with embryos and gametes outside the incubator, a method that measures temperature more accurately, more consistently, and a method that is much easier to use. So what is the problem with current methods used. And I will focus specifically on one type of probes, a thermocouple type T probe. That is, the reason is this is by far the most commonly used probe for these type of measurements in IVF. This probe is unfortunately not suitable to use at all, and the reason for that is that it contains high levels of copper. Copper has a very high thermal conductivity, and this thermal conductivity interferes with the measurement and cools down both the medium you're going to measure, and it cools down the probe itself. As a result, the probe will measure inaccurately too low temperature, and I'm talking about several degrees, and I will show you more about that. Another thing, and in addition, the thermocouples, they're difficult to work with, and since they contain handheld steps, that will further interfere, cause more error and more inconsistency. Thermocouple type T probes have different appearance, but although they may look different, they all have one thing in common: they all contain copper. And this copper will interfere with the measurement, as I said before. I was saying that I'm going to introduce you to an alternative. So this is an alternative that has been developed by Vitrolife. So it's a thermometer with a custom-made probe specifically designed to measure media temperature during handling outside the incubator, specifically for temperature in Vitrolife square dishes. This is a new and a unique way to measure temperature. Vitrolife have taken a sensor that is normally not used for this type of measurement and attach that to the bottom of the dish, and I will show you. The measurement with this VitroTemp is based on a temperature-dependent resistance in a platinum plate, a so-called PT100, that is attached to the bottom of the dish. The design of this dish makes sure that you measure temperature exclusively where this platinum plate is, with far less thermal conductivity disturbances or interference from the probe. This also means there is no handheld steps that will further then affect your measurements. So what I've been doing is that I have compared the temperature. So we have compared temperature by using a thermocouple type T probe and measured temperature with a PT100 sensor to see the difference. We have measured under identical conditions, and the best way to do that is to measure in the same dish. So we've used two types of dishes, Vitrolife 40mm dish and a Vitrolife 5-well dish, to which we have attached the PT100 and to which we also insert a thermocouple type T and compare the results. This is the results we see. So the column, the third column, shows the temperature recorded by the PT100, the VitroTemp. And the fourth column shows the temperature measured with the thermocouple type T. And the last column in red shows the difference. And as you can see, constantly, the thermocouple type T measures much lower temperature, and it's several degrees, between 2 to 3.5 degrees lower. And this is sort of will affect your way of working, and I come back to that later. I tested with different dishes, I tested with different volumes, and I tested with different dish setups. So does that mean that the thermocouple type T is not working, is incorrect in general? Well, we took a thermocouple type T and we placed it inside an incubator, which means that the entire length of the probe is in the incubator, and we also placed the VitroTemp in there. And in that case, we measured identical temperatures. So this clearly shows that it's not the probe that is not working. That probe, the thermocouple type T, is just not suitable for the type of measurement to measure media temperature in dishes held on heated surfaces. All this I've talked about so far was published in a poster at ASRM this year, and if you're interested, I could share that with you. But what we're talking about here is a commonly used temperature probe could result in setting heated surfaces within the IVF lab too high. This is a sort of an extra warning for the use of thermocouple type T's to measure temperature in dishes during handling. So if we think about what is the clinical relevance of this, and I turn things around. As I said, there is a risk that IVF lab works at too high temperature. So if we have a dish and we set the temperature on our heated surface to get 37 degrees in the medium by using a thermocouple type T. And then afterwards I measure with a Vitrotemp. I realize the real temperature is actually 39.3. If I do the same thing in a 40 millimeter dish, where I set the temperature with a thermocouple type T to 37, I measure the temperature with a Vitrotemp and I realize it's 40.5 degrees. And now you can understand that this can have a huge impact on your clinical result and your embryo physiology, embryo development. And I have been traveling a lot using this thermometer to see how it's working. I've been working with troubleshooting and visiting clinics, clinics that have reported problem with ICSI, problem with vitrification results, denudation, etc. And I bring this thermometer, the Vitrotemp, and we check the temperature. And in almost all cases, very, very often, we see that the temperature they're working on the heated surfaces, results in too high temperature in the medium. And you can see it's 39, 38, 42 degrees. And very often, we lower the temperature based on the measurements with the Vitrotemp, problem solved, and results are improved. So this is sort of an interesting facts about what's going on. So if I end by just showing you some summary of the Vitrotemp. So due to the unique design and features of Vitrotemp, it provides accurate temperature measurements. And you get accurate results. First reason is that you have a very sensitive and highly accurate probe, that itself. You have a low interfering from thermal conductivity from this probe due to its lacking copper and also due to the design of the dish. And the temperature measurements of the medium occurs exclusively where the platinum plate is, which mimic also where the embryos are. But in addition, you get stable and repeatable measurements, and you also get measurements that is very, very easy to perform, especially compared to using a thermocouple type T. We are in the booth. If you're interested to see it, we will be here and support it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Any questions at this stage?
So for this, we have to use this dish only.
This
We can't use in other BD Falcon and other dishes. We can't use
you
this.
cannot, because Vitrolife dishes differ completely since they are in direct contact with the heated surface, and that's the only dishes I'm aware of is doing that. So if you take another dish, there will be an airspace and you will get another temperature. So this will just show temperatures using Vitrolife square dishes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
We believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians and IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side.
Hello everybody, welcome back at the Vitrolife Group Academy Studio. I'm here at ASRM in New Orleans. I would like to present our next speaker. That's Dr. Hamish Hamilton, and he's going to tell us about the use of antioxidants in their program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaco. Thanks for having me here today. I'm presenting work today on, the title is A Radical Approach to Stress Reduction in Culture, riding the antioxidant wave. And this is really a story about the implementation of a single-step culture media made by Vitrolife with a formulation of antioxidants in there to protect the culture system. Now this is work that was led and done by our Queensland Monash IVF team and implemented on our laboratory on the Gold Coast. So I'm here at ASRM, so Dan Morgan, Dr. Dan Morgan, and Kate Watson are the people who've done this work, and so I would like to acknowledge them in that. So today, I'm just going to talk about, we acknowledge that embryo culture is stressful for embryos, and can be stressful for embryologists as well. And really our job is to really reduce that stress. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about why we made the change to single-step culture media, and also transition from sequential to single-step, how we did that, because it's not just about coming the next day and starting single-step. It has to be well planned and a lot of consultation, staff engagement, training, and then the post-implementation monitoring of it. So embryo culture is stressful. We're holding and culturing embryos in a laboratory which has light, free radicals. These things don't normally happen in utero, so we really have to be very proactive about how we minimize that. And so it's our job to ensure that the system is set up for that minimal stress in the system. And our embryologists are manually handling the embryos, moving them from one culture dish to another for embryo transfer, for egg collection. So it's a very stressful job in itself, but we have to minimize that. And so this is a very important part of why we've introduced this. What we try to do is we minimize exposure to oxygen, and you all know this, through a low oxygen culture environment. And what we wanted to do with this project was transition from two-step culture media into a single-step culture media to reduce the handling on the embryos. And we think that this was the right time to do it. Single-step has been around for a long time, but we now have the embryo scope, which is a time-lapse incubator, and where you can actually culture them for long periods of time with looking them without having to take them out of the incubator. And I think the formulation of single-step culture media has advanced a lot in recent years, and it was now at the stage where we felt it was time clinically to introduce that. So what we tried to do and the main reason is we want to introduce systems whereby the embryologists are not distracted or don't have as many tasks in the embryo lab, and they can focus on other things and leave the embryos to be uninterrupted. So why did we change? As I said, the culture systems have improved quite a lot in recent years, and that's really important. Confidence in maintaining the environment is a lot higher. Less interruption to culture. Every time you take the dish out of the incubator, you're changing the temperature, you're changing the pH, and you're exposing the embryos to oxygen. There's less handling, so less risk of an error or an event. Less transfer, so less possibilities of it's less complex, and traceability becomes important. And it's a continuous improvement step that we made. And it wasn't the first time we'd used time-lapse single step before. We had published this on a patient that didn't have a zona pellucida, and we advanced that for the single step because we wanted to have minimal disruption to the embryo, and we got a pregnancy from that particular patient. Transitioning from sequential media to single-step media. Continuous culture systems using two-step and single-step containing antioxidants went really well. The implemented GTL following more recently by the actual antioxidant GX media suite at our lab in the Gold Coast. And we had to engage everyone in that process, doctors, scientists, patients, and we had to proactively educate them and change the system gradually. And that was really important. So we had to change our laboratory work systems, because we had different timings of embryo steps, moving the embryos from dish to dish and refreshing. One thing I will say is that we still, in this process, maintained a day 4 refresh in this particular data because we were doing assisted hatching on day 4, so we still kept a day 4 refresh. But we're going to phase that out in the future accordingly. We had to educate our scientists, we had to educate our doctors. We developed frequently asked questions for patients. Obviously, we ensured we had all the supplies so that we could do the transition really well. And all the data went to our group scientific advisory committee for review. And we've now moved on to implementing it into other labs. So, and then finally, we keep reviewing, and we still do today, the transition and the results that we're getting from it. So here's an example of our patient frequently asked questions. Why have we moved to single step? We're using single step as our preferred media. It's beneficial to the embryos. Are there any additional risks? And will this cost more? So we really wanted to involve our patients in that process and make sure they're brought on that journey as well, because previously they would have been in a 2-step culture system, and having a different system may have caused alarm. And when we did this transition, we were doing it in parallel with the 2-step and the single step. So it was very important that we established a very good schedule that was tight, and this is an example of that schedule. So this is the actual suite that we used, and you can see at the top there we've got day 0 at the day of egg collection, day 1, day 2, 3, all the way through to day 6. So in culture we used the Vitrolife culture system, which includes GX IVF, GX MOPS, and GXTL on the day of egg collection. And then obviously they're transferred into GXTL from that point on. The fertilization was checked, and as I said before, on day 4 we refreshed that to a new fresh dish of GXTL, and that was, as I said, because of assisted hatching. On day 5 they were assessed for embryo development, for transfer freezing and biopsy, and transfer is always done in embryo glue. And biopsy is performed in GXTL because we have a CO2 controlled environment to be able to perform that. And this is the current results that we've got from very early stages. And as you can see, we wanted to make sure we're first of all doing no harm and that the transition is successful. And this is for a graph showing KPIs for autologous stimulated cycles. So we've got you can see the blue column is 2-step, the orange column is GTL, and the grey column is GXTL. And so we've got average age, which was equivalent to all media. The fertilisation results were strong in all of them, a little bit higher in GXTL, but there's no statistical significance in these. This is just to monitor to make sure that we're transitioning well. The utilisation was at least equivalent, if not better. Clinical pregnancy was not statistically different, a tiny bit lower, and the preclinical pregnancies were not statistically significant either. But what was important that we do a lot of freeze-alls in our lab, and a large proportion of our patients in that lab have all the embryos frozen. And so it was important for us to also monitor the frozen embryo transfer results afterwards. So this is the graph showing the frozen embryo transfer results with GXTL. So again, in blue, two-step media, orange GTL, and grey GXTL. And as you can see, the results were at least equivalent for average age, survival, clinical pregnancy, and preclinical pregnancy. So on the whole, it was a very successful transition, and it's something we're now starting to, having done that successfully in our Queensland laboratory, we've started to introduce it into our other laboratories around Australia. And so we continue to monitor that, and we'll look forward to giving you another update. And I'd like to acknowledge Dan, Morgan, and Kate Watson for the work they did with this. Thank you. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much, Hamish. One question I've got for you is, you mentioned about the frequently asked questions that you created for patients. What was the response from your patients when they got to know that you are going to switch media? How did they absorb that information?
Yeah, I think our patients were very reassured by particularly the less interaction with the embryos and keeping them, in the embryoscope. It made sense to that in a very practical way. So they were very supportive, but it does help to be very proactive with that and upfront about it and say this is what we're doing. So it's a really good lesson in positive engagement with our patients. Yeah.
So it's a good patient education beforehand is
yes,
important. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Not today. Hamish, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you for the next talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Vitrolife Group Academy Studio. So today is my pleasure to introduce you Dr. Julio Martin, that is my colleague and friend, who is going to talk about carrier screening. So Julio, please, whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My pleasure to be here and to talk about carrier screening. And when we talk about carrier screening, we are in the context of health prevention. We want to prevent Mendelian conditions for the offspring. And what about Mendelian conditions? They are single gene disorders that can be inherited in different Mendelian patterns, like the dominant, recessive, and X-linked, but they are individually rare, not frequent, but when we combine all of them, indeed, there is a high impact in the society. There are different sources indicating the prevalence of these conditions, and as you can see here, clinically they impact significantly regarding the admissions in pediatrics hospitals and also in infantile mortality. So there is indeed a need to identify the risk, and optimally in a preconceptional scenario, although it can be done also in prenatal. So to put clear these figures, the Mendelian conditions are rare regarding the incidence or the prevalence of them, but regarding carrier frequency, they are quite high for many, many conditions, like you see here in the table for some of them. And this is accumulative independently. So at the end, we have to keep in mind the concept that almost everyone is carrier of one of these type of diseases. It doesn't mean that the carrier will show a phenotype, but when combined, it can be a risk for the offspring. So what is the precise aim of a carrier screening test? The aim is to identify heterozygous carriers for recessive and X-linked conditions in women. And with that information, we have to combine in the male and female gamete that information to understand if there is high risk for the couple. We call that DNA match. Once we have that information, we can manage by informing the couples about the risk, and they can take options to do PTM or gamete donation. The field is not new, so that means that carrier screening has been done for decades indeed, in particular it started in high-risk ethnicities, and there are guidelines indicating or recommending to follow this type of testing. As just the last ACMG recommendation in 2021, they established a tier-based system, and outside high-risk populations, the recommendation is to go for tier 3 with a minimum list of genes about 130 conditions indeed, precisely. But also the possibility of doing tier 4, that is a higher number of genes, always giving information about the limitations and benefits of testing that quantity of genes. So, one key concept that we should keep in mind at the end of this practice resort is that the ACMG Professional College recommends to offer this type of test to every woman pregnant or considering pregnancy. Well, now I think it is important to understand what is the offering of this type of tests. And what we see, very briefly, is that the offer is fragmented. I mean that there are different providers offering different gene content in their carrier tests. So at the end, we have to remember that what we want is to combine the information in male and female. So this fragmented market may impact or limit the matching, the comparison of the data, because we all know that IVF patients move from one clinic to the other, and maybe one clinic use test 1 and the other use test 2, or a bank with donors decided to use the test number 3, with all of them different quantity of genes. So at the end, making a limitation in the DNA match, as you can see here in the slide. We took all this information in the market, and we realized that there was a solution in our hands to offer a carrier test trying to solve those limitations. So as a summary, our tests are based in exome sequencing, and we also use a complementary test in order to call complex variants. The use of exome has many benefits. I just want to reinforce the message that we can test almost any gene that has an association with a phenotype, and also it's important to understand that we can customize the gene content for the test that we offer, and there is no need for new resequencing when the exome is the methodology used for the CET, for the carrier screening. Also, it is important to add that we can upgrade, so we can decide what to report, maybe a closed list of genes, but we can upgrade that number of genes if it's required. An image that maybe summarize this is like if you have two tests and one of them has exome-based carrier screening and the other is a closed panel, regardless that you maybe don't report it initially a given number of genes, you still have that information in the exome. So we can recover that information, that we call that upgrade, and then do the matching for that couple. It's an advantage of using an exome-based carrier screening as Igenomix is doing. Let's put an example. For example, imagine that there is a bank of donors that use an exome-based carrier screening test, and you report a number of genes initially for that bank, and then you need to match with a patient that is positive. It has any type of test, is positive for a given gene. So maybe the gene was initially reported, and you can look for that in the report and offer the matching. But if it was not reported initially, we can still make an upgrade, recover that information from the raw data that we already sequenced, and update the report, and in that way we can match the information in the patient. So at the end, having the exome-based carrier screening is a perfect solution in order to offer matching and provide the information needed for all the couples to understand their reproductive risk. This is our main portfolio. We have different type of panels offered to banks or to patients. But again, since we have the exome and we are sequencing all the genes in the genome, we can recover that and offer particular tests like the CET1 or personalized version, customized. We can add as much as needed based on the request of the clinic or the patient because of the family history or whatever. For example, if there is one test in the market that offer a definite list of genes, we can mirror that panel in order to keep the service going in the market for already tested patients or donors. Just to finalize the explanation, we want to reinforce also that we have a platform that can be offered to our customers in order for themselves doing the matching for their patients as needed. Take-home message regarding the carrier screening offered by Vitrolife Group is we use exome sequence to report our CGTs, carrier screening tests. We defined our gene content following the clinical significance, the test compatibility against different tests in the market, and also obviously following the professional college recommendations. So at the end, our test provides universal matching allowing us to not only our main panels, but also offering personalized versions or giving the option to upgrade all of our tests. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julio. Fantastic presentation as always. Is there any question? So, Julio, we are always thinking in reproductive medicine in our field, in IVF, but do you think that this test is for everyone? I mean, we are thinking always in egg donation, but don't you think that this is for everyone because we all have the same percentage of mutations, right?
Right, totally true, I agree. These type of tests indeed are universal. Any couple that is considering, any woman considering pregnancy, this type of tests apply to them also. Doesn't matter if they have fertility issues or not, because at the end, the Mendelian conditions, the prevalence is in the population, not particularly in the infertile patients.
And it's not changing with the age of the patient, right? Like
no, not changing. It's not like the chromosome aneuploidies at all. No, that's true.
Okay. So thank you very much, Julio, and
My
see you in the next session. Thank you.
Bye.
Life. This marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side. Life, this marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet. The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side.
Can you like hold a timer for me because I can see 15 minutes? Okay. Like maybe on my phone we could put a big timer.
Okay. Show me your phone.
How can I see like a big one? My kids used to have like a countdown. My kids stuff.
Countdown for your kids stuff.
Life. This marvelous reality that moves us in as many ways as there are people inhabiting this planet.
You're like, okay, come on, you get to finish dinner. Let's
the more
go.
we learn
5
about
minutes
it,
before bedtime.
its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally.
So I can see.
iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, we believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side.
Oh.
Okay, I needed your.
She's keeping my timer so I could see.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I gotta get back to my happy self.
I said Julio when he reached 10 minutes. I told Julio, "Do you want me as well, or what?" You got Melanie, right?
Melanie's gonna let me know, and she has my little timer so I can see. Just 15 minutes.
You could do it like a little bit lower because for questions.
A little bit lower for questions. Okay. So we'll go through it pretty quick.
Welcome back to the Vitrolife Group Academy Studio. It is my pleasure to introduce you my colleague and friend, Dr. Tiffany Stankiewicz, who's going to talk about the EMMA analysis. So Tiffany, whenever you want.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Nasser. So thank you for joining us today. We're talking about advancing the analysis of the endometrial microbiome. So when we look at the periconceptional space, we know that the embryo encounters the endometrium, and the first kind of phase is the endometrial microbiome. So what kind of bacteria are in the endometrium that can either affect or improve implantation? So I want to start with an introduction of the microbiome in general, looking at the Human Microbiome Project that was launched in 2008. It's a strategy to understand the microbial components of the human genetic and metabolic landscape and how they contribute to normal physiology and predisposition of disease. So some fun facts about the microbiome in general. Humans have 10 times more bacteria than cells living in our bodies, particularly in the skin and digestive tract. So in a person that weighs 70 kilograms, approximately 1 kilogram is going to be due to bacteria. And between 20 and 60% of these bacteria, depending on their location, are not cultivable under standard laboratory conditions. Now, approximately 9% of the bacteria within our body are located within the urogenital tract. In the vagina, it is normally defined by the presence of bacterial species of Lactobacillus genus that are commonly associated with healthy genitourinary status. The vaginal microbiota typically changes throughout the menstrual cycle, and these changes can lead to several pathologies that could have implications for both reproductive and obstetric complications. So when we look at the microbiome through the reproductive tract, what we typically find is a very high biomass within the vagina, but very little diversity. And as we move up to the reproductive tract going towards the ovaries, we see the biomass decrease, but the diversity increase. Now, today we're focusing on the uterine microbiome, specifically in the endometrium. And recent research has identified the existence of an endometrial microbiome and has demonstrated that this dysbiosis of the uterine cavity is associated with poor reproductive outcomes in assisted reproduction treatment patients. So, for instance, in this early study by Moreno in 2016, what we did is that we looked at different microbiomes, so the endometrial fluid and vaginal aspirates from the same patient. And although we found that a majority of the bacteria belonged to Lactobacillus, we did see differences within these microbiomes, showing that the endometrium did indeed have its own personalized microbiome different from that found in the vagina. Now, when we actually looked at the different bacterial profiles, we associated to different clinical outcomes. We saw that patients with a high level of Lactobacillus and very little pathogens had higher likelihood of live birth versus those patients with miscarriage or not pregnant, where we see a high percentage of pathogenic bacteria. Now, we looked at the outcomes of 35 patients, and what we found was that those patients with a high level of Lactobacillus versus patients with high levels of pathogenic bacteria had significantly higher pregnancy rate per transfer, implantation rate per transfer, ongoing pregnancy rate per transfer, and live birth per transfer. We also saw a difference in miscarriage rates between both groups. However, this was not statistically significant, but in the case of Lactobacillus dominated, we had 16.7% miscarriage rate versus 60% in the non-Lactobacillus dominated. So not only does it appear that this microbiome and optimal microbiome is important for implantation, but also the maintenance of pregnancy. Now, I do want to talk about therapies for microbiome, and this was a recent paper from the group in Japan ran by Dr. Awami. And in this particular study, they wanted to determine if analysis of the endometrial microbiome and its recommended treatments have positive impacts on pregnancy rates in patients with recurrent implantation failure. In this study, it was a prospective cohort study in a single center in which they utilized the EMA test by iGenomics. A total of 195 women with recurrent implantation failure were enrolled, and the primary outcome measure was cumulative clinical pregnancy rate after 2 additional FETs. And what was found that 1 in 4 patients needed antibiotic therapy because pathogens were found in their endometrial microbiome. Now, what is an advantage of molecular technology versus, say, histology or hysteroscopy is that we get objective information about the bacteria within the endometrium itself. So that means we're able to give targeted antibiotic treatment for those pathogens detected. So in this particular study, 90% of the antibiotics administered were not broad spectrum, but were instead targeted to the specific pathogens. Now, when we look at the study group that utilized the EMA test and followed the recommendation provided, we had significantly higher HCG positive rate, clinical pregnancy rate, ongoing pregnancy rate, and delivery rate versus those patients that did not undergo any testing at all. Now to quickly introduce you to the EMMA test. EMMA stands for Endometrial Microbiome Metagenomic Analysis. It is a molecular assay used to determine whether the uterine microbial environment is optimal for endometrial health. So this molecular method is based on detecting and measuring the amount of DNA present in the endometrial samples. Here, we look at Lactobacillus species, which is the good bacteria. So I always think of these as a safety net, keeping the pathogens at bay. We look at reproductive tract pathogens, and we also look at those bacteria that are related to chronic endometritis. So that's included in our ALIS test, which is analysis of infectious chronic endometritis. So with EMMA, we get a full microbial view of endometrial health. So looking at the process here, if we have, let's say, normal results, the recommendation is to transfer within the next month. We know an optimal microbiome is present, and since the microbiome can be transient in nature, especially affected by external things such as antibiotic use, sexual intercourse, hygiene, clothing, etc., we want to ensure this optimal situation and transfer as soon as possible. If there is a dysbiosis where we see low levels of lactobacillus but no pathogens, then we recommend probiotics and then proceeding with transfer. And then in any case where we see pathogenic bacteria outside of reference range, we recommend targeted antibiotics followed by probiotic and a test of cure biopsy to ensure optimal microbiome. Looking at our global data, you can see that this agrees with the study from Dr. Iwami, in which approximately 1 out of 4 patients will need antibiotics because a pathogen has been detected outside of reference range. And with that said, about 70% of patients will need probiotics, again, to provide that safety net with lactobacillus to keep pathogens at bay. So now I want to take the opportunity to introduce you to upgraded EMMA and ALIS. This test was launched here in the US and worldwide in May of this year. And this test is based upon our knowledge with the endometrial microbiome, with over 5 years of running analysis with next generation sequencing and over 70,000 samples worldwide. We can now provide a more complete view of endometrial health because we know which are the most prominent bacteria found in the endometrium, allowing us to create an endometrial specific panel. So this is very important. So based on this data, this exceedingly precise and complete endometrial panel contains 97.8% of the bacterial pathogens detected with NGS. And what is relevant about this is that we report at the species level, not the genus level. And why is this important? Well, we could have 2 different bacterial species, a part of the same genus, but maybe one is more effective with one antibiotic than the other one's affected by another antibiotic. So this will allow us to give an even more targeted approach to creating an optimal endometrial microbiome. So one thing I do want to point out on our reports, which is specific to iGenomics, and this is based upon our scientific experience with the endometrial microbiome, is that we simply do not just indicate whether a bacteria is detected or not detected, but we do supply a reference range and give a corresponding value for that endometrial biopsy sample. Why is this important? Well, again, these are scientifically established values, reference range based on endometrial microbiomes from women undergoing IVF with subsequent live birth. So we correlated those women's microbiome who had subsequent live birth, and we were able to calculate the reference range. And what this does is that it prevents the overuse of antibiotics when they're not necessary. So if you joined my talk yesterday with Dr. Amy and Dr. Rogers, we discussed that by 2050, it's estimated that there'll be more deaths per year from antibiotic resistance than cancer. So we all need to do our part, make sure that we're using antibiotics responsibly, and in that sense, using targeted approach versus broad spectrum. Another new aspect of the upgraded EMMA for the US is that starting next month, you will get a direct recommendation for antibiotic and probiotic therapy. So previously, we just provided the bacterial profile and then different antibiotics that were effective for different bacteria. Now, you'll actually see a direct recommendation. So example, in this case, based upon the patient's bacterial profile, the recommendation would be amoxicillin, 500 milligrams every 8 hours for 7 days orally, followed by vaginal probiotics made of lactobacillus. So we're taking some of the guesswork out of this and giving more a targeted and personalized approach. So the conclusions here is that the microbiome is an emerging area of study in human health and disease. So not only in reproduction, but we know its significance outside of that too. The vaginal and endometrial microbiome are different, and we need to use proper panels to study each. We cannot use a vaginal panel to study endometrial microbiome. The presence of pathogens in the endometrium is associated with poor reproductive outcomes such as implantation failure, recurrent miscarriage, and preterm birth. And then lastly, the endometrial microbiota composition before embryo transfer could be a useful biomarker to consider offering an opportunity to further improve diagnosis and treatment strategies, even more so when reported at the species level. So that brings me to the end of the talk. I hope we have time for questions if there's any.
Sure,
Did I talk too much?
No, perfect. Thank you very much, as always, for your presentation. So, is there any question?
Hi, yes. My question is, after treatment, once we use our M-analysis test and antibiotics are provided, should we retest again to confirm that the pathogens are no longer there?
Yeah. So that's a great question. We receive that question a lot. And this was a change we actually made in the US earlier this year, where we strongly recommend this test of cure. And there's several reasons for that. One could be, especially with complex profiles, it might be tricky to treat all the bacteria present at one time. So we want to make sure that the optimal microbiome has been restored. We also had a discussion with some physicians. Sometimes when we clear the microbiome of one pathogen, another one pops up because we think of the microbiome as a very competitive ecosystem. So again, ensuring that nice microbiome free of pathogens and bringing in the lactobacillus to kind of protect the optimal optimization of the microbiome is extremely important. So we want to put the embryos back into a good home.
Is there an optimal time to do the biopsy, the endometrial biopsy, based on what time of the menstrual cycle? And the second question, the vaginal I'm presuming it's vaginal probiotics, and what is the frequency and duration for those?
Yeah. So the first question was, is there an optimal time to take the biopsy for the microbiome testing? And yes. So we always recommend during the secretory phase. And the reason for this is that we know the microbiome is going to be most stable under the influence of estrogen and progesterone. So we don't want to take, very close to menses, for example, where the presence of blood and the disruption of pH can lead to a temporary dysbiosis. Plus, during the secretory phase, specifically, is when the embryo will be encountering the endometrium. So we really want to understand the endometrium at that time. And then the second question regarding probiotics. This depends on which probiotic you use. So we have some options here in the US where it could be just as simple as, I think, like a 2-day long. Some probiotics say 7 days. So it's completely up to which probiotic is chosen. We do recommend vaginal probiotics over oral probiotics because it's a more direct route to replenish the endometrium.
Okay. So thank you very much, Tiffany, and thank you all for being here today with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
The more we learn about it, its principles, its patterns, and its codes, the more we value being able to help people who cannot conceive naturally. iGenomics was founded in 2009 to work side by side with clinicians in IVF clinics to bring genomics to assist couples fulfill their dream of bringing healthy babies home. Since then, we have brought to light more than 500 scientific publications on reproductive health and processed millions of samples. At iGenomics, We believe that genetics should be available to everyone because important decisions deserve an accurate and personalized diagnosis. We want to accompany you on this exciting journey of life. iGenomics, with science on your side.